Yeah, no, I think it's on both of them. All right, we're going to get started in just a couple minutes. I think blue sheets are starting to float around someplace. Welcome. All right. So thanks everybody for joining. This is the IASA2 working group. So if that's what you expected, great. And if not, we're not, please leave, I guess, or participate and enjoy. So we've got a quick agenda. We'll go through, let's see here. Let's go to full screen. Let's see how this works here. All right, this is the exciting note well, right? So read this at your leisure. There we go. Now it's like full screen. So standard note well, nothing special there.
Please don't make technical comments in this working group. In case you're confused, this is the place where we talk about the support activities for the IETF, not a place where we are designing technology or protocols.
Got it. So the agenda, we're going to talk about sort of where we are and what's next. We have a big chunk of time for really the key discussion that we need to have here, which is about the structure draft and really the few key open items there. And then Alyssa's going to provide us an update on the operating agreement and related items. That recently was on the mailing list, so that may be an interesting discussion as well. And then Yadi and Ted are going to talk about the IETF trust because those documents must be updated as a result of the elimination in the future of IAOC. And then we've got a few other drafts, and really there's a longer list that we'll talk about in a moment that have to be updated. And we'll probably briefly touch on, but probably only very briefly. And then at the end, John and I will attempt to do some wrap up and hopefully drive to some consensus on some key issues. Anything to add there? Okay. So looking at the current status and next steps, so the structure document, which we'll hear from Joe first on in a few minutes, is really the key guiding document. So we've really held off a lot of the BCP updates and whatever for the sort of finalization of the key decisions in this document, because it's no sense updating all of those things if we change direction in the structure draft. So the structure draft is really intended as the sort of philosophical guide of what we want to do. And the main open issue, as I think everyone knows that's on the mailing list, are what's the next step on director sources, what's the decision there, where's consensus. So we're going to spend a lot of time on that. What are the other drafts that we have to replace? And by the way, this list keeps getting longer, and I'll sort of simply say, if you see something, say something. So, if you see a draft, or excuse me, an RFC somewhere that, refers to like the IAOC or legal structure, or this or that, and it's not on this list, please send it to us, because these are sort of coming out of the woodwork. The latest one we found is RFC 2031. So we've got a few of these. We know in the charter we've got 4071, 4371, 7437, which is about the selection and recall process, so some obvious ones there. And then IOC selection guidelines and process, obviously. So all of those, and again, I would not be surprised if we found another one or two working here or there. So like I said, if you see any of those anywhere, let us know. In many cases, these are as simple as going through and just refreshing the thing to say, sort of find replace IOC to IETF LLC, but there are others that are more involved, particularly like the nominating process and so on. So I think that's the key. And after this meeting, Alyssa certainly will talk a bit about timing, I think, but after this meeting, we really have to drive to get a lot of these updated, and that's going to be a big effort the next few months, and we'll see where we go. So I think that's good for now. Anything that you'd like to add as we move forward? No? All right, so I think we've got Mr. Lorenzo Hall coming, so how do I get it on full screen? There we go. Let's see if we get the structure. Go to this thing and then bing. There we go, everyone.
Cool. So we've come a long way. Thank you for participating. And we have reached consensus on a bunch of things. And so this is the time to be in the rough if you want to be, or comment on some of this stuff. We've agreed on responsibilities, term length limit, 3 years. You can do 2 3-year terms. You have to have a 3-year break between them. There's an interim board made up of 4 individuals, and then we work with the NOMCOM, and the NOMCOM appoints the board, which we're going to, the actual board, which we'll talk about the structure. That's the one remaining issue here in a bit. There are some key policies to be developed, like a conflict of interest policy, a whole bunch of things that are sort of necessary to make sure that this works, and they're all in the draft. And then the general voting and quorum rules, about 2/3 of those things. And then something that's been on the list recently is there's one different one, which is the board removal of another board member, which is the sitting board members minus 2. So anyway.
Joe, can we just interrupt for 1 sec? It's come to our attention that we did not actually get a Stuckey to take minutes for this meeting. Before we go any farther, before any decisions are made, before we take comms and then are forced to go back through the audio, and would someone mind actually just taking some brief notes, a abstract and brief chronicle at the time?
Ecker, thank you, sir.
Ecker, thanks so much. And if there is anyone on Jabber who would like to jabber at the jabbering people.
Richard?
Oh, is that Richard? Thank you.
Cool.
So continue, please. Sorry.
I incorporate by reference everything I've said before this moment. Next slide. Aha! So here's potentially the meat of the discussion. There seems to be sort of two views on this. The first option, and I think we've captured the list conversation correctly here, is having a seven-member board. Okay, I thought these were different than what I'm looking at, but anyway, whatever. Where the first option has two non-com appointed, or three non-com appointed members, and then two of the seven appointed directly by the board. The second option has at least 7 directors, maximum of 9, with 2 optional self-appointed board appointments. There's a variety of ways we can go with this. It seems like on the list there was sort of a can live with moment where option 2 seemed to be, for the most part, something that people could live with. And I think I'm characterizing some of the concerns here that some folks don't want necessarily the board to be running away and appointing willy-nilly folks that aren't from the IETF community, aren't appointed by a process that we know to work reasonably well for appointing leadership in the IETF, the NOMCOM. There's some questions about whether the NOMCOM is really the right thing to select this kind of leadership position, but it seems that the consensus is that we can give them the kind of advice that they would need to actually make those kinds of appointments. I know there's a lot of, I'm not sure how to tee up this, no one's at the mic yet, so I'm unsure what to do. Do people want to get up and talk about it? They prefer one of these over the other? Are there certain structures? Sir.
Hi, Lou Berger. What do you want to do here? Do you want to argue?
We need to have, we need to come to consensus on the board structure.
Do you want to argue about the background or go with the sort of where you ended up on the list, which was what can we live with? Because those are two very different discussions. If we want to have the can we live with, I mean, we could almost just explain these and get a sense of the room, what we can live with. If you want to sort of change each other's opinions, then we're going to have a long drawn out.
Well, we have 45 minutes for this. I mean, you're welcome to try and change folks' opinions. I do think we're going to end up with hums that end up trying to get consensus on one of these models so we can actually sign stuff and get this going because we need to do this quickly.
If I might just jump in on that. Yeah, we do want to try to get down to a decision on this, preferably today, right? So I want to understand from people, are these the right options we're articulating? And yes, if the slide's a little off from the options, let's make sure we're clear on what they are. Are there options that we have not been raised that we should be considering that have been around? Like what?
No, how much do you want to rehash? For example, I really prefer another option, which is, and I've stated this on the list, so I won't be surprised to anyone, that we don't have any self-appointed board members. I personally see no reason for that. I think that if we need outside expertise, we can go hire them. Then expertise in executing a board is very different than who you put in as the directors of the board. And I think directors of the board, this is for the community, they should have some connection to the community, even if it's just that they were identified by someone, they were brought in, and they went through our non-com process. And they passed that litmus test. Even that minimal part, I think it's a requirement for a board member. So I really like option 3, which is, take option 2 and just cross out that as needed. So.
Yeah, and there were others on the list that expressed a similar thing, but they also, I think, said they could live with this. And so.
Yeah, I can live with option 2. Okay. To be clear, if we want to do the hum and this is the choices, I would hum for option 2.
Okay.
But if you're saying, well, I prefer something else, yeah, I think we should strike that because I think it's actually wrong for the control of the IETF to be outside of the community. Full stop. And we had a little bit of a discussion on the recall process, and fundamentally that's the same point. Ultimately, the accountability and responsibility is to the community, not to the board, and that board appointment turns that upside down.
Sure, and I guess I'll respond from my perspective on the former design team, which is that we feel that this is a different thing that's going to need expertise that we don't necessarily have in the IETF community. And there may be times of emergency or other kinds of extraordinary things where you're going to need to have certain people in place. Say, for example, fundraising. While we do have folks in IETF that have done quite a bit of fundraising, you may want someone who has specific connections to high net worth individual donors or capital campaign kinds of things.
Sure,
right?
or, you know, many
that you
boards
can
bring in
hire.
directors because they bring a lot of money with them. You know, if that's
Sure.
where we want, if that's where we want to go, you know, that's a community decision. It's not a board decision.
Let's move some mic lines, yeah? Yes, please.
Dan Bogdanovich. So I'm always curious what class each board represents, because board is a representatives of different interests in, that is put, that of different interest groups that are, represented in that community, company, whatever. And now when I'm looking of these through here, you're saying, okay, one is there are many from the ISG, one is from the ISOC Board of Trustees. But what is the difference between an appointee that is, for example, delegate selected by the ISG, or all the other ones that are confirmed by the ISG? Because I would like to know, there might be different interests. Some of them could be, for fundraising, and to have a board member who will be advising and having strategic, advice on how to fundraise. Because sometimes the best use of the money might be hire an external company or a group of people who know how to fundraise, who can introduce you to those groups that are willing to write the money. And that is one part that I'm trying to see. How do you plan which person of those will be representing four different classes and on that board?
So the IETF chair, we want to make sure that the IETF chair doesn't need to be there if we can get someone that is okay with ISG to sort of serve that role. The NOMCOM slots here in both of these models are going to be ones where we're going to give NOMCOM sort of a set of advice that here are the kinds of folks that we would want on the board. I think we captured that in the document in some respect. It may not be.
It has to be well defined. If you're saying the option 1, 7 directors, what 7 directors, what classes are they representing?
Well, I think, my sense is that maybe this is a point that we need to document further, is that it's something similar to perhaps the ISOC board, where you have people that come from different communities, but ultimately their responsibility in the ISOC case is to the board and the ISOC, community and the objectives therein. But, in this case, it would be the responsibility to the board and the LLC, regardless of what community process they came up through. So if you are the representative that came from the ISOC Board of Trustees, you're not merely representing the ISOC perspective, but you're, responsible really for the LLC, of course.
I can perfectly understand the ISO Board of Trustees, one appointee, one appointee. That's perfectly understandable. But I'm curious to know for the other ones, who are the other ones, what they represent. And the other part is, are you just looking this as an administrative oversight, or are you also looking as a strategic input?
Absolutely
Strategic, yeah.
In that case, it's even more important to know which, what each board member represents, because you don't want to have too many people from, the same background that will be putting in on the same advice. Because then you will get into a rut where you won't be able to make any decisions.
We could use input on.
Excuse me?
We could use input on the parameters there, like what you would suggest. It sounds like you're identifying an issue, but it would be nice to be able to.
Yeah, well, so I think what that touches on is there's going to be a need pretty soon for us to write some guidance for the non-comp, for example. And this gets to your point of sort of what's the mix of the slate you'd like to see in terms of variety of backgrounds, so that you have someone that can cover different types of areas of expertise, for example.
And it needs to be guidance that the NOMCOM can execute, right? And that's not a trivial, when you're talking about the kinds of concerns that, you might want to have a run this and that. The NOMCOM isn't a tool that can easily adapt to that.
Presumably that's both the interim boards and the working groups' collective input.
I think we need that, Brian.
And state your name as well. Then you
Yeah, Brian Carpenter. So I'm on option 2 because it's less messy and complicated than option 1. I disagree with Lou. I think the as-needed thing really is needed because of this exact point of getting, the collection of expertise and skills that we need on the board. There is another thing I've heard from 2 or 3 people in the corridors already, and it's only the beginning of the week. People are not certain that a group of 12 randomly selected engineers, known as the NOMCOM, are the right people to actually make the selection because the roles and the kind of person they're looking for are so totally different than in our steering group and architecture board, which is what the non-com process is designed for. So I think there is actually still a question mark over whether the non-com that we use for this is the same non-com as the existing non-com, simply because it's not a selection that is necessarily going to be made correctly by a group of randomly selected engineers. So I think we have to put that one on the table without changing the fundamental structure of what you're saying.
Suzanne Wolf. I've been really uneasy about jumping into this, in part because I think we're making it too complicated. I think in practice people are going to be surprised how little difference there is between these mechanisms, because once people are on a board, they're, as I think Jason's already pointed out, once they're on a board, they represent the interests of the organization as laid out in the bylaws and under relevant laws and so on and so forth. And we're selecting people who can do that regardless of where they come from, because regardless of their background, once they're on this board, they represent the community. That's what they're there to do. That's what they commit to doing. And if they don't do it, well, that's the discussion about removal and so on. With that said, I'm actually somewhat more comfortable with option one, because even though everyone will be representing the same community when they're seated, a diversity of background and skills is important. And I think as Brian articulated, it might be challenging for the IETF non-com alone to be able to recruit the talent we need. So to the extent that I think we must make a decision here, I support option one.
Hi, Sean Turner, No Hats. A lot of what she just said, I think we should apply the KISS principle here, since we're just starting out.
Keep it simple, stupid.
Keep it simple, stupid, and less is better. The pool of people is going to be the same at the beginning. I think it's going to be okay if we have 7. If we just, find out in a year, like, whoa, we just don't have enough people, we can start to process it and change it. And they can do that themselves, and they will have then running code on what actually needs to be done.
Leslie Daigle, Thinking Cap Enterprises. My issue is I can't actually choose between these two or any set just now. I think there's a problem that we still haven't addressed that actually should be the driving function. So I'm fine with keeping it simple. But I think that the key thing here is that we don't actually need a fundraiser on the board, and we don't actually need a CFO on the board. We don't need people who have expertise that we actually need applied operationally. We can indeed hire those facilities. We do need people for whom this is just natural and normal, right? That sort of in their everyday course of doing business, yeah, they understand fundraising going on. They understand when it's going right and when it's going wrong. Yeah, they understand, financial reports. They understand when they're going right and when they're going wrong. And the kind of people who do that in their everyday job, people here who are doing protocol development, at least not for the most part. So I think we still have a real problem in it. We can write down what we think is required, but it's really hard to specify people in a protocol document. So we haven't really had a great track record of capturing what we really want in terms of position descriptions in a way that gets applied, because the non-com fundamentally picks like. I want somebody like me or like that other person that I've seen in action. So in a context where we're talking about finding people who aren't fundamentally currently visible in our community, we have a real problem for figuring out where we're going to find them. So what are we going to do different in the non-com process so that these people will actually be introduced into the pool? And if we don't have an answer for that problem, I think throw dice, pick one, who cares?
And Leslie, real quick, what can we do to make you able to make a decision between these two? We got to do that in this room today.
So I want to understand that we have a theory other than we'll figure it out later for how are we going to find the kind of people that will actually do oversight as opposed to, playing with the mechanicals of running the administration.
And so is that marketing, so to speak, like I'm trying to think, like outreach?
It's how do we build a pool? And once we have a pool that we have built, how do we make sure that we have a body that's going to select from that pool in a way that reflects the desires of the community, whether that's the non-com, for which I have some concerns, whether it's another non-com, or whether it's the LLC board, is a detail to be worked out later. How do we build the pool?
You're going to jump.
Yep. So, there are
Repeat your
board
name.
members of the community, they're running their own businesses, they're participating in different boards in the IETF that you could imagine.
So am I, but my point stands.
I think Andrew.
My name is Andrew Sullivan. I
hats.
don't speak for anybody, even more so than usual. The one concern that I would raise about these options is that option 2 gives us a board of 9 people potentially. The budget for the IETF right now is about $7 million, which means that we have more board members than we have millions of dollars involved. And that seems like a lot of people to manage a budget that
You want
small.
to up our budget?
Well, I mean, sure.
I'm just
So suppose you doubled it, right? I mean, you're still got, that's a very, that's a very large board for an organization of this size. And boards that are bored make work. They invent things to do, and I think the goal here is partially to keep this tightly constrained so that it's focused on oversight. So I really don't like option 2 just because of the potential for this to grow hairs. I'm even a little uncomfortable with the 7 that we seem to have converged towards. It seems kind
Even
of
that's
large
too
to
big?
me. I think that 5 would be adequate. But I think that we already had that discussion and I'm prepared to be in the rough. But I'm really very concerned about option 2 going all the way to 9.
Do you have any concerns about the second option being variable in size, or is that?
I wouldn't care if it were variable from 5 to 7. That wouldn't bother me too much. 7 feels to me still too large, but it's not completely unmanageable. I think 9, you're really going to have, people are going to invent committees. And I think that we don't need committees and so on. This is just a management board, right? This isn't sort of the board of a $1 billion corporation. It's supposed to be doing something very, very narrow.
I'm way behind those guys, so maybe
Pete, it sounds like you're up.
Pete Resnick. I came up mostly to disagree pretty heavily with something Dean said at the beginning. I think people really need to disabuse themselves of the idea of any of these people representing any community or the ISOC Board of Trustees or the IESG. These folks are board members of an LLC. They have a legal responsibility to follow the guidelines of the charter and the bylaws of that LLC. And if that charter or bylaws comes into conflict with the desires of whoever appointed them, they are legally required to go with the bylaws and the charter and say, screw the community, screw the ISOC Board of Trustees, whoever it is that appointed them. So what we want to do is spend most of our time worrying about that charter and bylaws discussion and make sure that those are solid so that these people end up following our desires in the long term. But you're setting up a dangerous thing if you think that you really need to arrange these carefully because they're going to represent some view. I think that's bogus.
All right, okay.
Yeah. So, I don't want to mind read too much, but I feel like to some extent, this question about what, should we put people who aren't part of a non-com process? It's about should we allow alien people who are alien to our culture to be involved in, being part of the board? And I guess, I wouldn't want the entire board to do that way, but I'm not overly concerned by that for 2 reasons. The first is the reason Pete just said, which is to say that they're still constrained by the bylaws and whatever other documents we create. The second is that I actually want people I want some diversity of viewpoint here. I think we're very hard to find without some mechanism for bringing in outside views. And the reason is because organizations tend to get insular and they have insular views on how to proceed. And I want somebody on the board, however they're constituted, which I don't really want to get into right now, who is able to say, look, I've been to other organizations and
what you're doing is crazy. Like, you're doing this thing, which like no one else does, and it's nuts. And like that is, and so it's not about special skills for me, it's about diversity of perspectives. And so I worry that if we don't have a mechanism for bringing in those kinds of external insights, that we're going to find ourselves just doing things the way we always have, and perhaps not being able to change in important ways. And I think that's a real, and so people say, oh, we can bring in people as consultants who would play these roles. No, you can't, because the purpose of the consultant is to tell you what you want to hear. The purpose of the board member is something you don't want to hear. So I think that whatever mechanism, so again, I'm not entirely sure what the right structure is, but I think that if we're trying to optimize, but we never want to hear like people from like outside the community, that's a mistake.
Bernie.
Just want to add something what Leslie, Brian, and others said. I'm not convinced that the current non-com, as we have it, is the right body to select these kind of management positions, because it's very different. And also, non-com has already a lot to do. As I remember myself being in non-com, we hardly managed to make the process well for selecting the IAB, which was the last one, because we had so much to do with all the other positions. And now they're coming up to 5 more positions to select. And you actually need to get familiar what you actually have to select there and everything. So I just think you will overload the non-com as it is now. So if a kind of a non-com has to select this position, it should be some kind of other non-com, and maybe even a non-com that is formed by existing management in the IETF or something like this. But certainly not the non-com we have now.
Brian, can you say your last name for the record? Because I wouldn't dare to try to pronounce it.
My last name, Bernie Höneisen. Thank you. That was my first and last name. I hope you can cope with that.
Thank you.
It's an alien non-com.
Hi, Bob Hinded, a couple things. So just to sort of say what Pete said in a different way, the word is fiduciary responsibility. So the people on the board have a legal obligation to do that. They have to sign an agreement. It's not optional. So I don't worry about, where they got appointed. But, the discussion about the NOMCOM, our running code experience with the NOMCOM is it doesn't work very well for the IOC. And I personally believe the NOMCOM, it's because the NOMCOMs pretty much understand what the IB and the ISG do because they interact with them on a regular basis, but they never see the IOC. This is only going to be worse. I think this isn't going to result in the board you want. I think there are probably a bunch of different things, but I think you've heard the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over again and expecting a different result. That's what this looks like to me, and I think we need to do something else here.
Does option 1 look less like that to you than option 2? Or?
I think if you use the NOMCOM to appoint a lot of the board, it's not going to work very well. And I sort of lean towards 7 directors, but it almost feels like there's a couple more options that aren't on the slide.
Ted.
Ted Hurdy, Redwood City resident, climate best by government test. First, I wanted to point out that actually we're really close here, right? That we don't have anybody appointed by the ITU. Nobody's arguing that the multilateral organizations ought to be involved here. We're actually, I think, much closer to agreement than it looks like from the length of these mic lines, and I think that's a good thing. The second thing I wanted to say is I've actually changed my mind about this. I came on very strongly believing that the appointments by the LLC board itself were kind of fundamentally a bad idea and that we shouldn't do it. Some are looking at the ISOC model, which has this ability, which is rarely, if ever, been invoked, but it is a possibility for the board to consider. I think it actually has been useful for the ISOC board to have that possibility. It came up with me when I was on the board, and even though it doesn't occur often, that opportunity, I think, kind of clarifies the board around how sometimes having specific expertise is a way of exercising their fiduciary duty. So I think I've kind of come down to option 2, and in particular thinking that this is going to be an extraordinary event, not just like as needed, but kind of extraordinary event, but that probably bootstrapping this is one of those extraordinary events. But we probably would expect this to occur during the bootstrap phase and probably cease and go back to a smaller board once the things have gelled. And I'd also like to comment on the non-com piece just for a moment. The non-com came into existence to replace a previous system to demonstrate the consent of the governed. And I think that the point that it's focused on the ISG and IEB is exactly that, because the standards process is the part of this where the consent of the governed is the most important. I think for the bootstrapping here, using the existing non-com is an important thing to do to demonstrate that same consent. And that we can move from there to a similar body constituted post facto fairly easily. My understanding is that changing from this selection mechanism to a different selection mechanism involves changing Exhibit A of the operating agreement, which is relatively easy to do. But that for the moment, this is the bootstrapping mechanism we have. Thanks.
Colin James.
I thought Ecker's points about diversity were excellent and dead on. It's hard to get diversity on these boards, and I'm involved with getting people onto boards of some other nonprofits, and I think we're going to have a challenging time finding 7 people who we all agree are qualified, in any sense of the word qualified, and want to do this. They will really even more look forward to the non-com process. That will not make it easier to get board members. That's going to make it harder. So I think these two are nearly identical. I don't have a big difference in them, but I tend slightly towards the smaller. I think a 7-person board is probably easier to get decisions made with. And I think we'll have difficulty in bringing that all together. I totally agree that we need the ability to go and pursue people actively out from very different pools. You might have somebody that's just, been involved with a whole bunch of nonprofit boards and has really good expertise and bring them in, but is not necessarily somebody who regularly comes to the IETF. We need to be able to get those types of people.
All right, Glendine. So I think when I look at these two options, I do favor the smaller board. However, when I look at option 2, and I see the composition of it, to me, it really says to me, I'm getting 5 people that are going to be the core board that are being appointed by the non-com, because the ISOC board trustee might be very busy with other things over at ISOC. The ISG or IETF chair or whoever's appointed might also, especially if it's a chair, might be very busy. So there's going to be 5 core people that are doing the board work. So that's why I sort of favor number 2 for that reason.
So you're saying like the expectation value is sort of 5 people.
Yeah, well, you're going to have 5 core people doing the work, and that gives you a good quorum. The non-com issue, though, I mean, the whole reason the non-com is that the community has a voice to this process. And I don't have a problem with that. In fact, I think that's the right thing. The community has to have a voice. I think the problem we're going to run into, though, is that the pipeline into that voice for them to choose from is going to be really, really rough. And so wherever model we choose here, I think that there should be some resources given to the non-com, maybe paid for resources as in a headhunter recruiter type, to actually go out there and drum up participation from outside the usual suspects. So we get the diversity. We don't just get the rotation amongst the community that we already have. Or even if we go outside of our community and say, tap ICANN people, tap other orgs that look like us, we need more diversity beyond that.
It seems like it's going to have 2 components. One is outreach to folks, and the other is please don't be so scared of the non-com process because you may never have seen anything like this in your life.
Well, and one way that might come about is if you actually found some good executive recruiters, right, then the non-com may be more of a point of validating what the recruiters always say. These are really great candidates. Pick A or pick B. We recommend A. But B is your backup if you don't like A. And so the non-com then, instead of becoming the process to say, becomes much more of a validation of, yes, that's a good choice. Now let's pass to the ISG for confirmation after we've had our first pass to the confirmation. But I think you're going to need something outside of what we have today.
Well, and I think that this brings like in what Ted was saying about the bootstrapping, right? About the fact that at the startup time, when suddenly those initial non-coms have a lot of work to do, and we are going to be very scarce to find, it's going to be hard to find the right resources for that initially. So we may need to take extraordinary steps. But remember, these are going to be for staggered terms, And then, of course, subsequent nom-coms will have a much easier task, just finding one person, right, for this, hopefully as we go forward. And, because this is an amendable process, what we decide to do to get this kicked off, we could then see how this worked in 2 years, 3 years, and there could be entirely different approaches to this from them. So, but what we need to solve to get to the where we're going to get to is how to bootstrap it. So I think it's a very valuable suggestion.
And to that point then, one idea maybe if we like this idea of somebody who makes external executive recruitment, right? Get that started now, select that firm and get them into the process as we're developing what we want them to be. So they're ready to go on day one to bring that people, find those foreign bodies out there.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Thanks.
Hi, Russ Housley. I prefer option 2. One of the important things about NomCom is the accountability that it offers. And we're, I think, conflating two different problems. One, the NomCom understanding the skill set needed. I think that is fairly easy to overcome. Giving them a pool of talent to pick from, I think, is the harder one to overcome. And it will be up to the board members to seek, nominate, twist arms to help NomCom have such a pool, and the rest of us as well.
Harald Alvestron. One comment about NomCom. NomCom was a mechanism created in order to remove a self-selecting body that had lost the trust of the community without ruining the community. It was surprisingly effective at that, but that was history. Of these two alternatives, the size of the board is important for the socially, so for the way the board behaves as a group. Therefore, option 1 is superior. In both versions, we can get reasonable candidates. I believe at the moment that we should pick option 1 because it gets us off the ground, and we should change it within a relatively small number of years, because I believe that there are mistakes in this process. I've said some of that on the list, but we can live with option 1. We get a board of a sensible size, and if there are good candidates, we will pick them using that mechanism. So let's go with it.
Maybe just one quick comment there. I think it's important to keep in mind that we already have, I think, in the structure document, a notion of like a 2 to 3 year look back and review and reassessment. And I think as well, my understanding from a legal standpoint with the operating agreement is that the director numbers and sources are specified in an appendix, and this might be discussed later on. And so it would be easy in the future, relatively easy, to be able to update that as sort of an atomic item later on. So if we decide in a couple of years, hey, we'd like to make an adjustment here or there, it's not going to be major surgery to do that. So I think that's worth bearing in mind.
I'm worried about also the size of 7 directors, because the question is...
Too big, too small?
Too big? Too big. Because we should be able, as a NomCom, now I'm speaking as a NomCom member, to say we didn't find satisfying candidates. We don't want to put somebody on the board because we have to fill in that role. With this task of 7 directors, you're putting in a pretty tall task to do that, in a pretty short period of time. And you might end up, with non-good candidates. It is better to start with a smaller number and leave the option to expand versus saying, this is our initial bar of 7 people. Even if you get, like 3 candidates, for example, who will get nominated from NomCom, it doesn't mean that all 3 should be voted in. The size. That's one of my main concerns. Yes, but they say that always 7 directors.
We're going to get to that in a minute.
Yeah, we'll get to
We're
that.
going to revisit the number.
Yeah, so that's all.
Scott over there?
Yes. Alicia's got a quick follow-up question. Yeah, so in just a few minutes, when we get to the consensus. Wait. You got to follow up. Go ahead.
So just, there's a different point in the document which specifies the minimum board is 5 people, period, not like.
Because it says here option 1, they're not supposed to vote today, it says always 7 directors.
We're going to put up some numbers in a minute where we're going to ask, again, is it sort of base of 7 or base of 5?
I understand that it says always up there, but I think the intent of this, if you read the draft, is that your typical board will be 7, but obviously there's extenuating circumstances, startup, wind down, somebody goes on leave, whatever. And so there is a concept that if you have some extenuating circumstance, it would go down to 5. I just wanted to understand if that gives you pause. If you think 5 is the inappropriate minimum, that's what I wanted to understand.
So in this case, we can say 3 is a quorum, and we can then vote on the board. Because if you're saying 7, that means your quorum is 4.
Hi, Scott Mansfield Erickson, also incoming NOMCOM chair, so I have a stake in this. The thing I wanted to, I've met the NOMCOM board from this year, the team, and I have every confidence that that set of people will do an excellent job in interviewing people, really getting down into understanding the problem that they're trying to solve, getting input from the LLC liaison, or whoever it is that's going to become part of the team. There is no problem there. It's going to work fabulously because we have some really good people that know material and can learn material and interview. So that's not the issue. The issue is what Russ and Glenn have already talked about, and that is we need a pool. We need people from getting either an executive recruiter or something. We need somebody to help us go out to the other communities and pull those people in. And then we'll beat them up until they're right in the right shape that we want and make sure that the right ones are picked. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Lucy Lynch, having served on the last 3 NOMCOMs.
Thank you for your service.
I want to echo the garbage in, garbage out as the real problem here. And if you do not have decent nominees, and if you do not have a protocol with decent guidance on what you're looking for in the seat, you will get pot luck. If the NOMCOM has a Hobson's choice between 2, either choice is going to be a bad choice, and the NOMCOM cannot fix that. On the second point, I would favor option 2 if you reduce the NOMCOM appointees to 3, following up on points from Andrew Tedder and others, in that I think 5 is probably a fine size, and the option to add 2 if needed for quorum, for dropout, for whatever, that gives the board the flexibility to fix that problem, is a better solution. I like a NOMCOM-dominated selection process.
Andrew Sullivan, still no hat of any kind. I agree with many of the things that people have said here, but for the people who keep saying, well, NOMCOM has these skills and so on, I don't think that the other point about the NOMCOM has been adequately pointed out here. I made this argument once before on the list, but it seems to have dropped away, so I'm going to make it again. Suppose that you're an engineer of some kind and some financial company needs special engineering skill for some reason. They need you to come in and so on. And what they told you is, we have a process by which we have a whole bunch of financial things, and we're going to do all this analysis this way. And then we have a magic system in which we send financial people into the room, and white smoke comes out, and that's how you're going to be picked. That's what our NOMCOM process looks like to business people.
we look like mad people because what we have is a process by which we take a bunch of engineers and then we put them in a list and we run that through several random number generators, and out the other end comes the pool who are going to pick you. That is not, if I'm somebody who's going to volunteer my time to a volunteer board, I'm not likely to subject myself to random strangers. I want some confidence that I'm going to be interviewed by people who know what they're doing. Now, I know, and you all know, that our non-con is fine, and that procedure actually produces good results. This is not to impugn the non-con in any way, but it's to say that from the point of view of external volunteers that we're supposed to be drumming up magically somehow, I don't know, if this is the pitch that we're giving to them as to how they're going to be selected, I think it's not going to be that successful.
We need to work on that.
Scott?
Scott, I do have a follow-up on that because I don't look at it quite the same way that Andrew does. I mean, I've been involved in a number of nom-coms, not just IETF nom-coms. And it's just like any other interview process. If I'm a guy with a certain skill set and I go into a company and give an interview, I have no idea what these people are going to do or what their expertise is either. I spend a lot of my time educating people about what I can do and what I can do for the organization, rather than having the organization tell what they need. So I'm not as worried about that particular thing. If it's an external view problem that Andrew's worried about, then that's just us to educate them like it's like any other interview. I don't get to pick who interviews me when I go in for a job, so somebody from the outside shouldn't be able to pick who interviews them either for our community. Thank you.
Okay.
So the people just looking around the room, I think we've all talked about this now for some time in the list, and I think, a lot of us have heard what has been said at the mics here today. I get the sense people here seem to feel we're probably in a position to take some time and make decisions. Anybody here want to get up and say they don't feel like we have enough information or that there's more we need to discuss? Okay. So we're going to pose it. Okay. We do have.
On the option one, I will remove always.
Yeah, so we're going to show things that are slightly different from what was on the screen. Literally the first thing we're going to hum on, you see here, question one is whether people think 5 or 7 is a good target number for this. We've heard some 5, we've heard some 7. Already people would want to.
The one thing that I heard articulated, just to editorialize for a second, in saying, hey, base of 5 is that if you potentially keep the board smaller, they're naturally going to focus on more strategic things, maybe fewer committees, fewer sort of tactical work items, was the argument that I think I heard, and might be simpler.
Yes.
Ruberger, could I ask that you reverse questions 1 and 2, because I think that'll impact the number. Like, for example, if they're special, then I might say, yeah.
But understand this, as I said, this is a target number. This is what we expect would be the normal operating situation of the board, although in exception cases, it may be bigger or smaller than this temporarily. So just treat the question we see here when we say 5 versus 7. This is not absolutely mandated 5 or 7. This is target number. It may have to shrink or grow under certain exception conditions. Can we hear Lucy first if she's there, please?
So I'm fine with moving ahead with these two proposals and with taking homes. The one thing I will remind people is that as we get into the discussions of the next set of stuff, given the conversation about the non-com, there's probably some urgency about the updates on selection.
Yeah, you're right, yes. Scott.
Thank you. No, I wanted to clarify Lou's question. It's like, because when I look at a number, that number can mean exactly that number at least that number or at most that number, and it's important to understand.
Right, so I'll say it one more time. This is the intended target number. This is what we imagine under ordinary circumstances would be.
Right, but that's the point. So it's plus or minus some number
Well,
of
it's
5.
regular seated board members.
Yeah.
No, you have to say what constitutes the board of how many people.
Yeah, can we have one conversation here, please?
Can you increase the font size so that people?
Oh, increase the font size, sorry. Can we make this bigger?
Control plus.
We have 4 computers up here, sorry.
Yeah, basically 6, yeah. Okay.
Does anyone know how to increase font on Windows?
There we go.
Control plus.
What a wizard. Jason for the win. Okay. Yeah, so, sorry, Scott, did you have you good?
No, well, I still looking at that, you say this is what you want-ish, but if I pick the 5 director thing, then we could end up with 6 directors based on what I'm hearing, because it seems to be that there's a plus or minus to the target number that you want.
So think of question 2 independent of question 1, right? Like, so question 1 and then question 2 may do that to question.
If there are, oh, okay.
See what I'm saying?
Okay.
Right. So question 1 independent of.
Here's the question that we're trying to ask this on, Scott, is do you think that this board requires 5, 7, or 9 people to do its job? Okay.
Well, the way I answer that question is I think we need a board that is at most 5 directors.
Okay.
But the way this is reading, it could be, if you pick 5, then it could be 6 or 7
But again, we're talking about. Yeah, sorry, I was going to get in on this.
Yeah. So I think in keeping with the structure of the document as it stands, there's 2 concepts. One concept is your standard operating procedure for this board, which I just understood you to say you believe there should be 5 people under the standard operating procedure. There's a different concept, which it might also be worth asking about at the end of this, which is, okay, let's say the hum shows that consensus is 5. There's another concept, which is this sort of minimal board that you need to operate in extenuating circumstances, and that might be the same number, or it might be a smaller number. Like in the current draft, the standard board is 7, but there's a concept of a minimal board of 5 for extenuating circumstances. And I would just point out that there's another organization in the internet sphere which has recently come to sort of a challenging time because of the way that this minimum number was set. And so it's not an unimportant consideration, but it's not a normal operating procedure kind of consideration. Does that help?
Yeah. Let me just follow up. The one thing that I'm missing here, maybe I need to read more, is I like directors, but you can also have advisory directors, and I don't see, we didn't want to do any of that.
I think that's sort of a board policy thing that doesn't need to be in these legal agreements.
Dan McDonald, so in the bylaws of the LLC, you have to say how many initial board members are constitution. And it cannot be 5 or 6 or 7, it has to be a fixed number. And that means you're saying the board constitutes of 5 members or 7 members.
Board members can be hit by a bus, right? And then you have 4 and you need to do something, right?
In that case, you can replace them, but the question is what constitutes the minimum, it's not once you get into the meeting. It's what will you put into the document that will constitute the board. What you have to have. You can always have the replacement. What is the minimum number that you can start having a board?
Yeah, the way that I think about it and the way that I'm trying to structure the GitHub document sort of guiding the questions here is you've got some basic level, like a minimum number of people that you will always have that number, right? I mean, someone could get hit by a bus, but they get replaced, right? So I think the question is, is it, is that 5 or is that 7? That's really the key question. And in either of those scenarios, which we'll get to as a second question, or 2 people that might be LLC appointed, because there's really like 3 sub-options, like only the non-com bringing in, the incremental people versus a mix of non-com and LLC. So I think the question is, like, as a base number, are you starting off at 5 or 7? And then, in either of those scenarios, which we'll get to in a second, that may or may not grow with self-appointments, if you will.
Yes, and this is already specified in the LLC agreement. It doesn't have bylaws, it has an LLC agreement. And so the question, the change here, if the consensus is different from what's in the draft already, would be to delete the number that's there and put a different number there. But the concept already exists in the LLC agreement draft.
Lou, one last week.
Lou Berger, does the 5 include self-appointed board members, LLC appointed?
It may, depending on question 2.
Yeah, I mean, again, I'd like to get, rather than where they came from or why, how many people we think we need to run this board. That's the question we're trying to ask.
Yes, Suzanne Wolf. No hats, not my first rodeo. 5 on an ongoing basis, as he is permanently established basic number, feels a little too small to me. It's subject to capture. But it should be enough to do the business of the board if there are temporary vacancies. 7, and 9 feels too big to me for the reasons we've called out here, which makes 7 either the best or the worst possible choice. But
I think that's what the draft actually is now, right? There's 7, but 5 is the minimum for it to operate.
In order to do business.
That's what's actually in there now. But I just, because people here were arguing for 5, I thought we should go around and see, let's take some hums. Let's see who thinks 5, who thinks 7, who thinks 9. This is not a, what can you live with? This is a, what do you think it should be? Let's do that first and see how this goes. Sound good? Okay, Jason, you want to do it?
No, it's you.
Okay, I'll do it. All right, so all in the room who think that you need 5 directors to run this LLC, please hum now. That number is the number that you would like to set, that has the requirements to run this, yes, 5. Did I hear a good hum for that? For 7? Maybe a little louder than 5. For 9. Okay, so sounds like 5 and 7 are contenders here. It was louder. It was louder. Anybody want to say more about that? So so what we have in the document today. Let me now go to the language is exactly there, which is 5 is the minimum that we're required to do this, but 7 would be better. Can I get just a hum on who likes that as the approach? Hum now. That was weaker than the 7. Yeah. Yes, Ted.
Ted Hardy, can I just ask you as a friendly suggestion from the floor to simply take a hum on who cannot live with 7?
Okay. Can we take a hum? Who thinks what's in the document right now, which is we're targeting 7, but we can minimally operate with the 5, is not something they could live with? Please hum now. I heard one gravelly hum from somewhere back there. That sounds pretty good. Could I ask actually as well, who could not live with 5 as the number? Who thinks that would not work?
So I'm trying to figure out what I'm transcribing here. So we just took hums for anybody not live with 7 or 5, and it was like tiny for can't live with each one. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I think it was a little louder for who couldn't live with 5, but it was, again, it's always hardest, right, to choose between the things that are actually very similar and where it's not going to make a huge difference, and this is where we can easily get into the bike shedding. I mean, under these circumstances, I think what's in the document is reasonable, and it's what ended up in the document, and since everyone can live with it, let's do that. Anybody want to get up and say, let's not do what's in the document now, and oh my God, this is a big mistake? Okay, well, that's one question. Good. Oh, John Levine, do you want to speak to that? Sorry.
Yeah, I don't necessarily think it's a big mistake. I do think people are underestimating how hard it's going to be to find qualified people. We may come back and say, wow, it's finding 3 qualified people along with the 2 statutory ones is all we can do. But I think it's perfectly reasonable to go and see what we can do. But keep in mind that once we actually understand what this thing does and what the directors actually do, we may have significant revisions to the process to sort of comport with reality.
Well, and again, I think that the escape valve in this, that 5 is sufficient to minimally operate it, right? I think gives us a bit of latitude, especially in this startup, period. We don't really know how this is going to go.
I mean, saying this, I mean, personally, I don't have much of a dog in this fight because the chances of the ISOC appointed person will be me seem pretty high.
Fair enough.
I need a clarification, this is Barry Leva, because both Glenn and John made some comment about, Glenn said something about the ISOC Board of Trustees person would be too busy, and John said 2 statutory people, which I presume you mean ex officio kind of things. The one appointed by the Board of Trustees is not a Board of Trustees member, it's just that board made the appointment, correct?
I mean, yeah, I presume that, is that the case in the document? Yeah, it could be anyone. Is it likely it will turn out to be a Board of Trustees member of ISOC? I mean.
That's their choice, but
Yes,
the
it is
point
their
is, it is not an ex officio position, it's a position that is filled by the Board of Trustees in whatever way they choose to fill it.
That's my understanding.
Yes. Okay,
Right, Joe?
thank you.
Yeah, it's important. Yeah.
Just as clarification, that means that with 5 members, the LLC can legally operate. In that case, I'm fine. This is a reason because the minimum number is 5, but it can be higher.
Yes. Well, I mean, our target number is 7, right? That's the
That's higher
point.
enough, but the minimum for legal operation is 5.
Yes.
Okay, so that's the key.
I hear people thinking this is cool. Does anybody not think this is cool? Because this has been one of the hard ones in the list, so. Okay.
So what I'm writing down is consensus for a target of 7, minimum operating number of 5.
Yes.
Yeah. And then I think the second question, which gets us to sort of illustrate how would this work in practice, there are probably 4 different variations here. There's probably more than that, but just to not make it too crazy. I think at one extreme, you have a minimum of 5, and that's all it ever is, right? So that's, you've always got these first 2 bullets, which is, one from the IESG, one from the ISOC Board of Trustees. That carries through for all of these options. In this one, you would have potentially 2 from the NOMCOM and 1 from the board. Option 2 is, 3 from the NOMCOM and, as needed up to 2 by the board. So it's sort of that expandable case as needed, special situations, if you will. And then option 3 and 4 are really sort of saying, you always need 7. So it's sort of pushing that. And so by default, you've got, 2 that are always from the board. And at the bottom, this is the NOMCOM only that a few folks have asked for. So any comments on these, I guess, and then we can try to narrow down a bit more.
So since and remember too, we're talking kind of about what we're going to need to do as a startup, right? And then what we're going to need to do going forward. And there's going to be this exceptional startup case that we're starting with here. If we're having our target number be 7, presumably option 1 is not one that we're going to be taking hums for this time around anyway. So we're looking really at the distinctions between 2, 3, and 4. So as people come to the mics, let's kind of talk about the virtues of these and what we think the issues are. Scott, you're up, I think.
Oh, thank you, Scott Mansfield. So my understanding of the conversation that we had 10 minutes ago and these options, option 2 is the one where you can operate with 5, but you can have 7. Option 3 and 4 require that you have 7, so you can't operate with 5.
Oh, no, you can still operate. You can still operate with 5. Here's the problem.
I just wanted to be very clear because I didn't understand the expandable to 6 or 7. It means.
So in option 3.
Yes, I see the difference now because it says as needed and you can add them, but they're not necessarily there. That's okay. I get that. So I don't see a whole lot of, and I like option 3 now that it's 3 appointed. I think that was Lucy's point, right? If we can get it down to 3 from the NOMCOM is better than 5, that's fine. And, okay, I'm mumbling now, so that seems to be.
Well, and just to be clear, so I'm kind of tacitly reading into option 3 as well, because we can minimally operate with 5, right? Under exceptional conditions, it might be part of startup, right? As an exceptional condition, we might not have 3 people that we can fill from the NOMCOM initially or something, right? I mean, I wouldn't rule things like that out. The point being, option 3, when we're talking about where these appointments come from, is structurally where they're supposed to come from. That doesn't necessarily mean that there are going to be 7 people at a startup time or during some exceptional condition.
Hold on one sec before you comment, Glenn, and other folks comment. I think maybe an easy way to sort of remove one of these is to look at option 4 for a second, which the notion is it's those extra sources are only from the NOMCOM, and there's no ability either on a regular or as needed basis for there to be self-appointments from the LLC. And that's maybe a critical question. And I think that the consensus seemed to be in the room that it was okay to have some self-appointments, which might drop off option 4, and we're narrowing down to one choice maybe.
Yeah, I mean, and the distinction I think between 2 and 3 there is very much in this, are we structurally saying the board is on the hook to provide 2 people for our ideal target number for the board, whereas option 2 is saying as needed, they can fill these things in, and it's much more dynamic, right? And so I think that's the distinction between those two. But please, there are people at mics. Speak.
Okay, Glenn Dean. And I'm not trying to open up a can of worms here, so if I do, that's a misinterpretation of what I'm trying to do.
Okay, you made me feel so not scared by what you're about to say. But yes, go on.
I think we're getting a little too focused on the non-com versus appointed thing. And because frankly, if the non-com had 5 awesome candidates, pick them all. I'm good with that. If the non-com, however, has 3 good candidates and 2 stinkers, I want them to have the ability to say no to those 2 candidates that are just not good candidates. And this gets back to Lucy Lynch's point, which is if you say you got to fill 3 slots and you've got 3 bodies, you're done. And we don't want that to happen. We want them to have the ability to say we can't fill that slot and we don't need another process. So maybe what is maybe here is a hybrid where we say the goal is to achieve this, right? And then you have a set of processes by which you can execute against to that goal. It can be the non-com. If the non-com can't succeed, then it could be a self-appointed process that's validated by the ISG.
Mm-hmm. No. Alyssa, do you want to?
Further question and comment? Option 2. Option 2, what is quorum when there's the as needed is not filled?
Well, they're not sitting members, and so it's 2/3.
Okay, I just didn't, when you were talking about minimum 5, I didn't know if you had a 5 rule there. On the prior version, you had one other option, which was 4 + 1. And to me, that would be more interesting than your current option 4. So 4 non-com, 1 as needed. You had that on a prior slide. So I would have liked that. Now, that's what I planned to say before Glenn spoke. I think Glenn has a good point.
I suspect we tried to structure option 4 specifically for you.
Alyssa Cooper, just in response to Glenn, it maybe is just a different way of framing the problem, but you still have to make the decision this way because the non-com needs clear instructions. Like, it can't just be totally variable to the non-com if you're going to have a minimum number and require the board to operate. So I think it's interesting to think of it that way, but it still boils down to like making a decision of some sort as articulated on the screen.
Lucy.
Lucy Lynch, I will point out that you have a bootstrap problem in the first instance with options 2 and 3, if the non-com is unable to return 3 people, because you never get to the board being able to appoint those additional members if the non-com fails. So there is a fragility there that's going to require extra care first time out.
Yeah, Scott Mansfield, Erickson, just to help move along with an opinion on what I think the correct option is here. I really like option 2 personally because I've dealt with a lot of standards bodies that deal with these things in super secret ways, and 2 seems a lot more transparent to me, but giving the board flexibility to appoint as needed, that would hopefully be something that would really be used as needed, and the community could cause shenanigans if it wasn't. That's why I really like option 2 better than 3, because 3 means that you are going to have people that are appointed in a way that the community has no idea how they were appointed. So, and I don't really know how you get to, well, I know that the first time you do this, there's going to be an issue of doing option 3 because you have to have a board in order to appoint from the board. So I'm not sure that would work. When you get further down the road and you have people that are there for a year and 2 years and 3 years, then it does make sense. Option 3 makes more sense in that because you have people that are on the board that can then appoint other people. But at startup phase, I think option 3 provides less transparency. That's why I like option 2.
Okay, thanks. Colin?
Well, James, we can't discuss the option of non-com failing. As soon as you put a minimum quorum for a board, this is how it works with all boards. You now have a minimum and you cannot operate. They cannot fail. The non-com has to deliver people. That means if only 5 people apply to the job and they have to provide, or 3 or whatever the number is, and they have 3, those people are automatically appointed in a conversation. And that's how boards work. And it's not just a startup issue. You regularly have things like a law changes, the liability of the directors changes, and the whole board resigns instantly. This happens all the time to nonprofits. So, enjoy. The non-com's just going to have to do it. That's how it works.
Dan McDonough, I'm for the option 2, and I would just make it that in case the NOMCOM cannot appoint 3, that they can be, essentially self-appointed by the LLC board.
Yeah, it doesn't happen in the bootstrap, unfortunately, but yes.
Well, so that's the one part, you have to come up with a number that you will be sure, but really putting onto NOMCOM, you have to find 3 good candidates in a short period of time.
I know.
That is really, really hard.
I know.
Just responsive on that point.
It's okay.
I will say that we frequently don't have enough candidates for something and reopen a position. So there are some fallback mechanisms here that go into that guidance.
True. Sorry, Lou.
No problem. Lou Berger, I think it's interesting that we could observe that option 2 satisfies a whole bunch of whatever. What Glenn was talking about and what Alyssa was talking about is if we look at that as needed, if the board wants to, they can always ask NOMCOM to try to fill those slots. So it actually gives us a lot of flexibility there. And we don't have to write that down. That's their choice of how they want to fill it. So it seems like option 2 has the right amount of flexibility.
Eric Squirrel, I can certainly live with option 2. But to the points I was saying earlier, I think it would be good to actually encourage the board to have some external IETF opinions. And so I think I'd prefer 3.
Scott, are you in?
Sorry, Scott Mansfield. I was going to say that it is very imperative that we get a decent pool. And I'd still like option 2 better than option 3 because it gives us the flexibility to keep the numbers down. So.
I'm not really hearing anybody go to bat for 4, at least as written. And I'm hearing a lot of people who seem to think option 2 is good. Again, I think Ecker is quite correct to characterize the real distinction here is whether we want to build structurally into this board that independent director idea. When I look at the difference between 2 and 3, like 3 is really saying the way we ideally want this board to be constituted, there's going to be some people that are effectively independent from the NOMCOM process. And if that's an important thing to you, then that's probably one of the things that will gravitate you towards 3. Having said that, Barry, you want to?
This is Barry Lieba, riffing on Ecker's point. I'm good with 2, but I want to make sure that when we actually put that in, we don't say that the as needed is a truly exceptional situation. I want to give them the flexibility to routinely have board members coming in from the outside that they've called on.
Yes, there definitely is a spectrum of as needed.
It has to be signed and voted.
Okay. Yes, you need to stop having side conversations. What I mean is, I don't mean just bringing them in informally, but I don't want it to be, we need a board member from the outside. We have to define an exceptional situation that allows us to do that. I would like that to be
up to the board.
I would like the board to be able to do that at their discretion.
Yeah, and that's a good point. I think we've heard that a number of times on the mailing list as well, that you don't want it to be so exceptional that when you invoke it, the community's like, wait, why are you doing this? What's the problem? And the bar is so high. And so there might be some argument in that scenario to at least start out, doing 1 or something, so you establish the normalcy of that. And we can put that sort of philosophy or that expectation in the the structure documents and others.
So the board chair can invite people to the meetings based on, I mean, this usually in the, in the board structures, that the board chair can invite people to the meetings that he believes will contribute to their discussion at that point. And there is difference between an advisor and a board member. So I am very much in favor that, a board chair or board chair based on the group recommendation brings an advisor to the meeting. But here is saying if you want, you can increase and I understand those are the board voting members. So once you invite them in, it's not that easy to get rid of them out. So it's on a more permanent situation.
Yeah, and that's by design.
Point noted, thank you.
And there are different term limits for these folks in the document as it is now, right? They can only do one of these terms.
Ted Hardy, I both agree with some of what was said earlier, but want to put a slightly different spin on it that I think is important. I think it is possible that the startup phase will be an exceptional event and that as a result, we will see a very early exercise of this facility. But I think that's different from making it so completely normalized that the board doesn't have to define to the community why they are doing an external appointment. I think if it gets to the point where they feel like this is the common practice, the right thing to do at that point is to update the document to move from option 2 to option 3, get the buy-in from the community that that move is taking place and explain it. But I think that as long as we're moving to option 2, we still need to treat it as if maybe startup is exceptional, but we're going to go back down to a 5-person board as the normal operation for some of the personal interaction reasons that have already been raised. And I think that, to me, that means that we stick to option 2, have an early exercise of it, but that the community expectation stays then that it goes back to a 5-person board unless there is an update to the operating document.
So Ted, do you need as needed to be defined before you can decide between these two options?
No, and because you're sitting up front, you're missing some of the side conversations going on in Jabber, one of which said you should change this to at its discretion, and I strongly disagree with that formulation. I think as needed is much closer to correct.
Yeah, Scott, last thoughts, we got to do this, man.
Yeah, I mean, as needed does not say exceptional. It's as needed is as needed. So I think it's pretty flexible the way it is.
All right, so people here think we've talked this through, got your opinions, we can take some hums? Okay, so all in favor of option 2 as discussed here, please hum now. All in favor of option 3 as discussed here, please hum now. All right, there was some vocal minority there, loud voices from inside the room, but I think that was pretty good for option 2, actually. It was pretty good. Option 3, people, if you were humming for option 3, if you can't live with option 2, please hum now. Okay. I think that was nobody. Okay.
How would you like me to characterize the consensus there for 2 versus 3?
I'd say it's a solid consensus.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, great, thank you, and that will be helpful. So what we're going to do is we'll put it out on the mailing list. We'll put it out on the mailing list and do a final sort of confirmation of consensus. Those typically run a couple of weeks, so we'll do that. So next up is Alyssa. Let's see. Oh, there's a new. All right, that's right. Just do a little dance. Yep.
Do you want to ask that question first?
Well, I put it in my question.
Oh, did you? Okay.
Yeah, it's actually not really in the question anymore.
Oh, we'll find
Which
out.
one was, yeah, okay.
All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the legal and financial documents. These have been shared now on the mailing list for a month or so, and we've had a little bit of discussion of them. I'm going to run through them at a high level. I assume people have maybe read them, but perhaps not fully understood them. So I'll give a little more detail than is typical for a draft presentation. Next. Okay, so there's, can you go back one, sorry? Yeah. There's two legal agreements, and then there's like a third document, which is just perfunctory, which is the certificate of formation, which I'm not going to talk about. The two legal agreements are, first of all, the LLC agreement, which specifies the terms between ISOC and the LLC for how the LLC operates. And then the second one is about the transition and the shared services between the two entities. I'm mostly going to focus on the first one, and then at the end talk a little bit about next steps. Next.
It works, yeah.
If you're scrolling, you might not. That's probably not going to work, right? Oh, it does work. Amazing. Okay. Again, I assume you have read these agreements. There's a lot more in them than what I'm going to cover. I will talk about some of the establishment features of the LLC, briefly about the board of directors. We've talked about it a lot already today. Some of the safeguards between the two entities, and then the part about the capital contributions from ISOC to the LLC. So, LLC establishment. The document specifies that the LLC will be the corporate legal home for the IETF, the IAB, and the IRTF's administration. So I want people to make sure that they understand that. It's covering the whole umbrella of I-star entities here in the IETF. It specifies Delaware as the location of setup, basically because it's an easy place to set up for legal and administrative reasons, and it potentially kind of reinforces the external perception that the LLC is operating as an independent entity from ISOC. It's treated as what is called a disregarded entity for tax purposes. So basically means that we file a joint tax return with ISOC. We are preserving ISOC's tax status as a charitable organization, but the LLC would have independent, essentially as an independent legal entity for all other purposes. So we just talked at length about the board of directors. I'm not going to go back into any of it. It's all captured in, it's not called an appendix, actually it's called an exhibit. That's a mistake on the slide. So it's all of the details that we just discussed and more are captured in Exhibit A of the LLC agreement. And notably, the LLC board is required to put any potential amendments to that exhibit out for review to the IETF community. There's like an explicit provision in there for that. We thought that was important given that that's the main piece that the community has expressed an interest in thus far. So just briefly on some of the safeguards that are established in both directions, really. In case the LLC engages in some sort of sustained material breach of its obligations to ISOC, ISOC's main remedy is that they can dismiss any or all of the directors. But for other, potential catastrophic scenarios like dissolving the LLC or something, actually requires mutual agreement of both parties. So the thing that ISOC can sort of do unilaterally after a well-specified consultation process is remove directors, but to actually dissolve or transfer the thing would require both parties to agree. As specified, ISOC reserves go ahead.
Just clarifying that point. So, but they can't make more, the directors are still made via the previous process. So, like that doesn't get to appoint 5 new directors, they just get to bounce it back to the IETF community and there's some sort of like standoff.
Yeah, okay. That's right, yeah. Yep.
So when do you want to have discussion? Because I had a question on the previous slide, and I don't know if it makes sense to do it here or wait to the end. Is it the intent that this appendix governs or provides the constraints on which the board operates? Like what governs their decisions, their decision processes? Because I heard that a couple of times that board members, no matter where they come from, they're going to be constrained by what's in here.
So there's there's kind of two answers to that. Not in the exhibit, but in the body of the document, the responsibilities of the board are specified. So that's just in the main body of the LLC agreement. It says what the scope of their responsibilities are and establishes them as the I don't remember what the word is, but they basically like take the responsibility for the company. Exhibit A is just like the appointment processes, the term lengths, the term limitations, all of that stuff. The interim board is Exhibit A.
So the body's all about fiduciary responsibility, while the exhibit is sort of more the operating constraints. And the reason I'm not bringing this up is I had the question about transparency. And I was okay with the answer, I think someone put on the list of, well, that'll just go in the BCP 101 replacement or whatever. But when the discussion was, doesn't matter where you're appointed from, you're going to be constrained by this document, well, then it's pretty important that this document capture that there's transparency requirements to the community.
Yeah, I don't see any problem putting that into the agreement, but maybe people will disagree.
Dan Bogdanovich, usually, like the board of directors responsibilities are part of the company bylaws. So you're putting as a separate exhibit of the LLC, or?
The LLC doesn't require bylaws. Maybe Brad can speak to this since he's in the queue behind you. This is the equivalent of what would normally be bylaws, but an LLC doesn't require bylaws. Yeah.
Yeah, Brad Biddle and the IETF Legal Counsel and primary drafter of the document. And just to confirm that point, yes, that's true. Sorry about that, Brad Biddle, IETF Legal Counsel. Just to confirm that point, yes, it's an operating agreement. Since we're an LLC rather than bylaws, rather than articles of incorporation and bylaws, we have a certificate of formation and an operating agreement. And so what we're calling the LLC agreement or the operating agreement, that is sort of the equivalent of bylaws for an LLC. And we do capture points like duties of directors, in the main body of the LLC agreement. I actually got in the queue to make a different point that I nodded yes to Alyssa in connection with Eckert's question about exactly how would it work in that sort of kill switch scenario where something's gone sort of deeply awry and ISOC needed to appoint board members or ISOC needed to remove board members. It actually would be, at that point, this would be kind of a disaster scenario. Something's gone seriously wrong, but I misspoke when I indicated yes to Alyssa. The way it would work is in that scenario, as currently drafted, ISOC would have the ability to reappoint directors. So they could remove and then reappoint directors to the LLC.
Okay. So that's a different answer than I gave you.
I'm not saying this is necessarily a deal breaker, but let's just be clear on it. So that means that ISOC's remedy in the case of dissatisfaction is effectively they can form an entirely new board of their choosing, which will then permit them to dissolve the LLC, right? So is that correct?
There's a sort of the threshold for this happening is set extremely high.
I understand, but there's a texture that says the mutual agreement that is irrelevant if you can do that.
I'm sorry, maybe restate your question.
It's like the second bullet is like a happier scenario. It's like everybody decides we don't want this LLC anymore. Everybody in the IETF decides we don't want this LLC anymore. Sure. ISOC has to agree to dissolve it. The first bullet is the not happy scenario where Brad can read you the text, but there's this long period of sustained material breach of obligations and comment back and forth, blah, blah, blah. That's the first bullet scenario.
Yeah, and I'm just trying to be clear that the consequence of this is that I mean, I don't think it's a problem. Like, the important to understand what we're agreeing to is that in the case of a low sustained breach of material obligations, ISOC can replace not just dismiss, but replace the board of directors, and then the board of directors will presumably do what ISOC thinks is appropriate.
Yes would be the short answer to your question.
Hi, Bob Hinton. Just to put this in some context, doesn't bother me. As long as we are dependent on ISOC for most of our funding, that's a much bigger lever than doing this. So if we have some other source of funding, fine, we can do something different. But for the next period of time, I think that's the real reality under this. And who can take people, restructure the LLC doesn't really matter.
I think it's important to think about under both scenarios because hopefully we won't be opening this thing up too many times, even if the financial situation changes.
Yeah, and I would stress that is a worst case. Yeah, I'm John Levine, yes. And although I cannot speak for the ISOC board, I would be astonished if the ISOC board wanted any more. Like, we have other stuff to do. I mean, our goal, part of the goal of this LLC is to hive off this work so that we don't have to think about it more than once a year when we reappoint someone like me.
So just quickly taking through ISOC's rights that are reserved in this agreement, ISOC has the right to approve amendments to the LLC agreement. So if the LLC wants to propose amendments, then they have to have agreement from ISOC. Fundamental and material change to the nature of the LLC's activities. So the scope of what this LLC is supposed to do is specified in the document fairly broadly to make sure that it covers everything that we needed to do. But if there was some like very serious change of direction that the LLC wanted to take and start, I don't know, farm bots or selling cars or something, then ISOC would have to approve that. Material change in accounting or tax policies, again, to the point of having a shared tax return. Admissions of new members, where in the current setup, ISOC is the sole member of this LLC, so that would obviously require ISOC approval, mergers, sale of assets, whatever. And conversion of the LLC to a different form of legal entity would also require the approval of ISOC.
Will we ever really have an idea what fundamental and material changes to the nature of our activities means? I mean, that's the one I grapple with. I'm not sure I'm worried about it. Maybe just that type of text that doesn't matter, we don't know what it means. But as an engineer, it bothers me.
Brad, can we let Brad respond? Brad and I talked about this for like 12 hours in the last 3 months.
I think it's really, to some degree, I think where we're shaking out is what you described, where we won't sort of ultimately really know, like it's not something we're going to define any more deeply than the words that are there. But I think that's okay. So I think that's the right answer.
I can live with that.
So, capital contributions from ISOC to the LLC. Oh, you guys are good. Okay. So what are the goals of the capital contributions? One is to cover the LLC's annual operational expenses without needing to go back to ISOC or anybody else for help closing gaps at the end of each fiscal year. So I think people are aware that because we have actually just been part of ISOC since the existing IASA was set up, we've kind of had this habit of topping up at the end of the year if we didn't quite make the budget that we thought, because it was all just one pool of money, so it didn't really matter. The goal here is to, have a stated budget and live within the means of that budget. Second goal is to lay the foundation for the LLC to be successful. So to make sure that it has what it needs in order to accommodate the administrative requirements of the IETF. The third one is to accommodate increased expenses associated with running the LLC. So I think everybody is very clear. Running this LLC is going to be more expensive than the current IASA model. We want to make sure that we account for that. And then finally, to have some flexibility to experiment with new initiatives that further the IETF's mission. So we don't want to be constrained only explicitly to do exactly the things that we do now in terms of the administrative support for the IETF. We like to, have new remote participation capability and hackathons, and think of your favorite new administrative support feature that we've added in the last few years. We want to make sure that we continue to have that kind of flexibility. So those are the motivating goals behind this proposal. There's two kinds of contributions in the proposal. One is an annual contribution, which is set at $5 million. If you want a comparison point, in the current annual budget, the asset contribution to the IETF is $3 million, so this is definitely an increase. And then there's the second category, which is upfront contributions. There's two kinds of these. One is an operating reserve, which to date, ISOC has had a reserve there, and the money could have been used by the IETF if necessary, but the idea is to move this over so that the LLC manages it, and that's based on a calculation that would essentially cover us in extenuating circumstances for 3 years. And then the other upfront contribution would be a transfer of the existing IETF endowment funds, which is about 2.6 million. This requires a bunch of work to do because the donations were made to ISOC under certain circumstances, but that would be the plan to eventually get that in place. And then all of this is kind of predicated on the notion of the 2-year look back that somebody mentioned earlier. So at the 2-year point, we would come back together and say, how's this working? Do we want to do more or less? Do we want to do something different? The point is not that like after 2 years the contributions end, but just that we put it into the agreement so that the parties it's like a forcing function. We have to come back together and reevaluate. Yes, Heather.
Heather Flanagan. One of the things that I often rely on Internet Society resources for is when I have questions entirely outside of my or IETF expertise, like marketing questions or web design questions or things like that. And that's handled very collegially at this point. I basically send email to Greg and other folks and say, can you help me out? And then we'll spend sometimes quite a lot of time trying to resolve whatever question it is I have. I'm not, that's not a monetary contribution directly, but I don't know where that lands when this kind of thing happens.
So I think in terms of the operational support that the LLC is going to be providing for the IETF, we have specified at a high level what those support services are. I think how that plays out in practice will depend to a great extent on the executive director who gets hired and figures out what does it seem like the needs are. In which case, whether you would go to the LLC staff for those questions or somebody else, could be ISOC or anybody, I think is kind of a TBD. I think we do really want to get away from this, or we will be forced to get away from this kind of ad hoc, we just rely on ISOC for X or Y, and it's not really clear, who's paying for what kind of thing. We have some of that. We've done a lot of work to clean that up already, but there is still some of that. And I think we kind of need to get away from that model if this is going to work.
Thank you.
My name is Andrew Sullivan, and I will have a hat in September. And I think I can say fairly for ISOC that with the proviso that Alyssa was just saying, that we like to get away from some of that informality, there is no hope of any kind that, ISOC is going to disappear and just kind of decide that this is all not really interesting to us. So don't have the idea that, that's all just going to day 2 and, poof, nope, can't talk to anybody because we've got a services agreement. We're not large international IT support company.
So just to take a look at what this looks like compared to a sample preliminary potential idea of a budget for 2019 and 2020 for the LLC. As compared to our budget for 2018, the main differences here are the step up in ISOC's contribution and the basically doubling of anticipated operating costs for the LLC. And this was based off of some work that Portia did to come up with these estimates. So as you can see, this kind of achieves the goals that were stated at the outset, provides a nice cushion to have flexibility, to go up and down, to accommodate potential startup costs and all of that, and potentially have a surplus still at the end of the year.
Why the RFC services are going down in cost in 2020?
So I should have said, actually, a lot of these other numbers are just from the existing IOC projections, but it's because of the RFC format work is going to conclude. It's a project we've had for more than 6 years, and it's anticipated that it's going to be done. Yeah. I see Heather cheering over there. So that's kind of the operating part. This is the reserve balance and the endowment. So as you can see, I put 9 million in here. We're still kind of working out exactly what it would be between 9 and 10 million. But the operational reserve would come in this year and would be there for the duration. hopefully the endowment money would come in this year and would be there for the duration. We do have one committed donor to the endowment who's on sort of payment plan, so that would keep coming in. And then we would basically reinvest the investment income from that into these reserves. So last bit on the documents is the transition and shared services agreement. So this is the other legal agreement. That's pretty straightforward. As far as transition goes, it essentially says that all the IETF contracts and property will be assigned to the LLC, unless we discover that some of them can't be assigned, but I think people are hopeful that we can assign them all. And then as far as shared services goes, the assumption is that the LLC will not be using ISOC services, again, to the point earlier. So things like IT, HR, accounting, those things will be the LLC's responsibility to set up for itself. So where do we go from here? We, I think, did a great job of closing on the kind of last open issue in the structure draft. And I think based on that, once we confirm the consensus on the list and capture that back into the legal agreements, we'll basically be in a position to finalize these things prior to the ISOC CEO transition. So incorporate that feedback, put the final documents out for a short review for the IETF community in parallel with the ISOC board's consideration of the documents. Of course, they've already seen the existing versions. And hopefully execute those agreements in August. So just to be clear for people, that means that the structure document is not going to be like published as an RFC before we execute the agreements. The agreements are going to reflect what's in the structure document, but I anticipate that if anything comes up in the IETF last call or whatever, we have that amendment clause in Exhibit A, and we could change things if we needed to. So that's the plan.
Pete Resnick, question. I was going over the amendments thing. There's a lot of stuff about how amendments must be approved by both ISOC and the LLC. Is there anything that prevents ISOC and the LLC board together from doing things that the IETF community might not like? What locks the community to the LLC?
Yeah, so specifically with respect to that Exhibit A, there's two things. One is there's actually a provision in there where it's a kind of default agreement from ISOC to changes to that exhibit. So unlike the rest of the document where it says, just says mutual agreement, for Exhibit A, it essentially says that the presumption is that ISOC will agree to these changes, and they're given a 30-day period to object. The other thing is that Exhibit A requires the board to put amendments to that exhibit out for community review. I think in practice, the entire thing would, if there are any amendments to the thing at all, they would go out for community review. And this perhaps gets to Lou's point about actually incorporating a transparency principle in the agreement, which seems easy to do. But that's what's in the document right now.
Kelly Brown, ISOC. So I wanted to give some comfort to the room that the documents that we've just gone through have been the subject of a collaborative work agreement between us. Our attorneys have been working very closely together, as has our CFO, as have I, and the design team. So at this stage, what you're seeing in front of you has not gone before the board of ISOC, but has been discussed with the board of ISOC, and I'm feeling very comfortable that we're at a place that we have agreement between, at least before a vote, with respect to this current documents.
Mike Bishop, my one concern with that, with saying that it would go to the community for review, review does not necessarily mean approval.
Correct.
So they could say, we intend to make this radical change, and the IETF could say, we hate that, please don't do it. And they say, okay, thank you for your comment.
Yeah, and I mean, that's why we have the recall and, the processes that apply to the directors, I think.
So I have a kind of down in the weeds question on the finances and the reserve. and the chart that you showed. The reserve transfers from ISOC, and it looks like that reserve gets increased if we have a savings year over year, and it increases based on cash out of the endowment. But if we had a catastrophic year and had to cancel a meeting or whatever, and the reserve went down, at this point from now on, the LLC and our fundraising efforts are responsible for rebuilding that reserve. Is that correct?
Well, so just on the first point, we can't spend the money out of the endowment.
No, the interest, the income.
The interest we can spend. Okay. So that is part of what goes into the reserve.
That's exactly what I'm saying.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
Forward moving.
Yeah, if we had to rebuild the reserve,
it would be
what would we
our
do?
responsibility on the LLC side.
Yes.
To rebuild the reserve if we had to call on it.
Yes, yeah.
Just
I mean,
carry.
obviously, like, asking ISOC to help us do that is always an option, but yes.
Gonzalo, when we were discussing this, actually, it goes both ways, right? So if you see here, actually, the reserve grows to 12 billion. We don't know what the operating cost will be in 2021, but the idea is to cover a rainy day, whatever you call that, of 3 years, right? So in that sense, if we are giving too much money, maybe the idea is to reduce it a bit. If you have problems, the reserve is smaller, we will actually grow it to that. But the idea is to basically keep it at that 3-year level. Yeah.
Hi, Alice, John. I attempted to read through the legal documents. I'm afraid that I failed. But I got the impression that all of the text I was reading was stuff that had to be there in order to satisfy legal requirements and were not at all exceptional. I'd like to just get reassurance from our lawyer that, yes, this is completely boilerplate text that I should just trust him on.
So Brad Biddle, IETF Legal Counsel. Excuse me. I mean, there's, just so you know, the source of this document. So David DeFolio is ISOC Legal Counsel, just waved over there. Excuse me. And, where we started with, there's basic forms, essentially form documents that are used to create LLCs. There's no, so we started with a form, but we did really think carefully about the precise facts and circumstances of this exact deal. So I think it's not necessarily, this is just, you just pull a form document out and then we're done. It took some careful crafting and drafting, and it's something that we went back and forth, quite a bit about. But I don't think there's anything unusual in this that if you're worried about, should you be wary or be surprised, would you be surprised, or would a lawyer who looked at this be surprised by some particular term in the agreement? I think the reaction of most lawyers who looked at this would be, it's a pretty standard approach to forming a single member LLC.
Thank you. Boring is good.
Thanks.
Maybe to second Kathy's comment, at the ISO board, if you guys approve this here, we are ready to meet that timeframe.
Great, thank you very much. So, kind of getting down to the nitty-gritty of the non-coms needs, assuming this all goes to plan and we have consensus on the final details in a couple of weeks. Based on the earlier home, it seems that the instructions that the non-com would need would be to appoint, these are not the right slides, actually, sorry. 1, 1, and 1 is what that should say, yeah. So one person for a 1-year appointment, one person for a 2-year appointment, and one person for a 3-year appointment, since we have 3-year terms. So that's what we would be telling this non-com that Scott is chairing. That would be the instructions to this non-com. There's a bunch of other stuff on that slide then. Okay. You want to comment on that?
Not so much a comment, Glendean. I have a question. Since we have term limits in here, if you get appointed for a 1 year, they don't apply initially? Okay.
Yep. So other things that the non-com will need, a job description of some sort for what these people are supposed to do. I started working on this a little bit, and I think as far as process goes, we can use the working group mailing list to essentially refine that. I mean, I think people know that typically the body that has a vacancy is the one that provides the, there we go. Yeah. That's not it. No, that's in the data tracker. Sorry, it's on Google Docs. So, it's okay. I just changed at the last minute, so. Go ahead, Scott.
Hi, yeah, Scott Mansfield. Is this a bad time for NOMCOM to ask for more budget to get some headhunters?
To get what?
To get some headhunters?
Yeah, let's talk about that. I guess it's a possibility. I don't know. We'll talk to Portia. But we've also, so the job description, I think we will use the mailing list to vet the job description and need to get that off to Scott in very short order. Also, I think an advisor, so, typically each of the bodies has somebody that they send to the NOMCOM to be available to answer questions and provide guidance about what's happening there. My idea there is to have one of the members of the design team serve in that role, since they've been pretty heavily involved in the whole theory and creation of this thing. So if I don't hear any objections to that, I think we're going to try to make that work.
So I apologize. What I find on Google Docs is what I've put up here.
Oh, okay.
So,
That's all right. I think I can remember the other things that are missing from the slide. So another thing that the NOMCOM will need is a timeline for when do we want these people to be seated, if it's different from the typical NOMCOM timeline. There has been some discussion earlier about, let's ask them to do these faster than all the rest of the slates, or to announce this slate before the other slates. So that's something to discuss. Yes.
Lucy Lynch, so this was in response to the adding someone from the design team, which seems fine to me, but one of the hanging chads in the current NOMCOM documents are that when we added an advisor from the IAOC, it wasn't clear how much of the discussion they sat in on as part of the NOMCOM confidentiality process. So clear scope on what this person is going to do would be helpful.
Yep, good point.
Does this look correct?
Yes, thank you.
Right, and just one last thing from Scott Mansfield on this particular thing, especially from what NOMCOM needs. We also, and maybe it's here somewhere, but because a board member, we're going to be asking different questions and having access to different material about these people. We need to understand a bit about, is there any U.S. law or HR or financial documents or anything like that that we need to be aware of and have our people sign off on? Just that would be a need. So legal advice, I guess, would be something that we would like to have. Thank you.
Good, thanks.
One more, because somebody referred earlier about hiring a recruiting agent, like an executive recruiter for board members. Many of us know people who are now semi-retired, and they are, high net worth individuals, and are still active, but they want to be full-time active. And we could use, an internal call for nomination to for that work position, even during our plenary, because people might have some ideas, or they spoke with someone who is still doing some work. And such people might be willing to come in on the board of the LLC and might bring in not just valuable experience, but also, connection to the donor circles.
Yep, definitely. So the last thing on here is the NOMCOM will also need directions from the IAOC about potentially not filling IAOC seats, and the IAOC has discussed this as well. So that would be forthcoming information to the NOMCOM if all of this comes together in a month. What else? So I think this is the last slide. So just for clarity, or to revisit who's doing what while we have this transition process. So as far as the oversight part, did you have going back to the NOMCOM stuff, Scott?
Sorry, just one last word. The other thing that NOMCOM needs is the date. When do you need these people seated?
Yes, yeah, the timeline, for sure. I mean, I'm assuming we can ask for a date that's faster than usual. I mean, I didn't hear anybody object to that when it was discussed on the list, and I just said it in the room, and I didn't hear any objections. The NOMCOM might object.
I will certainly bring that up tomorrow at our NOMCOM meeting.
Okay.
And be able to tell you. I can't speak for the NOMCOM without speaking to the NOMCOM first, but we need to know what your parameters are, and then we will tell you if it's possible or not.
Okay. I mean, I think I had heard some suggestion of like December 31 or something. But if people have ideas what that should be or how fast we need this, like, bring them up. So who's doing what during the transition? So as far as the kind of oversight piece, once we create the LLC, there will be an interim board, and the oversight of both the transition and the ongoing administrative operation of the IETF will shift from the IOC to the interim board. As far as the operational tasks, of which there will be many, those are currently being handled by the IAD and the IETF Council, Brad, working with ISOC and all of the other contractors to make that stuff happen. And then as far as IETF documentation, that's what this working group is for. So we looked at the beginning of the session at the whole big list of all the documents, and that work will be ongoing while the LLC gets spun up.
Leslie Daigle, 2 comments about the IOC to interim LLC board. One, the IOC as currently constituted is larger than the proposed LLC board. 2, it's also not doing the same function. And I think we have a problem where we don't need to establish habits early on, carrying over a lot of what is different about the IOC into the LLC board. I mean, I appreciate the practicality of identifying people who have some awareness of the current state of things and managing some level of oral history, et cetera, but I would strongly suggest don't call it the interim LLC board, call it something completely different, call it the transition leadership team, call it whatever you want, but it's something that absolutely has to be torn down and thrown out once the LLC board is constituted, in my opinion.
Yeah, so the arrow here indicates a handoff. The interim LLC board is actually a construct that's specified in the legal agreements, and it has 4 people on it. So yeah, these are like 2 completely different bodies, for sure. Yeah. That's it. Okay.
Great, thank you. And I think we're going to have Yari. They aren't great. I added it to my.
Okay, so I was going to talk about IETF Trust and the impacts that it will have based on the IASA 2.0 changes. And there is a small impact. There's no impact to the actual thing that IETF Trust would do, but there is an impact for how people get named there. As you know today, the IOC members, including the ex officio members, are also trustees of the trust. And we do need to change this. Fortunately, and I'll get to the details in a sec, but fortunately, we don't actually have to do this on a critical path. So we can actually operate for a while, given some of the details of the contract. So there's no major urgency, but it is something that we should do. And there's 2 drafts, one that's the actual proposal that we're making, and then there's some rationale or background in other documents. The update is very simple. Updates are Cs 4071 and 4371 with regards to trustee selection. All other aspects of the IETF trust remain as it is today. The proposed trustee selection going forward after the change or after this is adopted would be that there be 3 trustees well, from the NOMCOM, confirmed by the ISG. Their terms would be 3 years. 1 trustee appointed by the ISG,
and one trustee appointed by the ISOC board. Okay, so no ex officio members and sort of smaller set of people than previously. And just to get to the why this and what is it today and what's the difference. So currently the IOC members serve as the IETF Trust trustees. I think it's altogether nine people. And the trust is also formally defined. I mean, we have RFCs about this, but the formal actual definition is in the founding documents of the trust. And the current documents say that eligible trustees have to be current members of the IOC. And it also says, oh, oops, something's happening. It also says that if there's, for any reason, fewer than 3 individuals serving as trustees, then the ISG shall appoint 1 or more individuals to serve in a temporary capacity as trustees. So this is the thing in the current contracts that actually saves us from doing this on the critical path. We can have the ISG appoint people if we have no updated RFC yet. Of course, maybe we do have. This is a fairly simple thing to do, I think. So we can perhaps get the RFC done in time. Next slide. They're up-leveling a little bit. There are different ways to think about this change. So obviously some change is needed. And what should we do with the IETF trusts? And our goal here was that we actually want to cause minimal change. And we believe that the IETF trust task and characteristics of people that is needed to manage that task is different from the LLC or even the current IOC. And our suggestion is that the IETF trust continues its independent existence, and we just nominate people there in a slightly different way than today. There's a possible other alternative, which would be that put everything in the LLC. I'm not, at least personally, I think that would be not the best approach, given that the tasks are somewhat different, and the IETF trust actually serves a very broad community, and it has a very well-defined task to look after this IPR and make sure that that's in safe hands. And I think we can keep it separate, and keeping things separate when we can is actually a useful thing in organizations, I think. We also think that given the nature of the task, upping the terms or term lengths is reasonable, and reducing the number of people for this is reasonable. The exact details of how many people and so forth, that's a thing that we could discuss. The current draft what we have also suggests that there are no ex officio members. Previously there was IETF chair, IAB chair, and the ISOC CEO and the IAD, so 4 people altogether. You could maybe make a reasonable argument that one of those, perhaps the IETF chair, should still be there, but this is our starting proposal at least. I did want to note a couple of things. So first of all, so it's not just the RFCs. We also have the trust, the formal trust founding documents, and those can be updated, and I think they've been updated in the past. It's a community process, but essentially this, if we were to make this change in the RFCs, then there would be a request for the relevant changes to happen in the trust founding documents. The other thing is that the IETF trust actually serves a broad set of people. It's not just the ones here in this room or even sort of those working in the IETF. One example of that is that we recently took hold of the IANA-related IPR, which is the trademark and domain name. If we think we are making a change in the trust, then we should certainly inform our other communities about this. We have this community coordination group, CCG,
I could take on that, or that's a convenient place to send that information to, and they can take it to their own communities. We haven't done that yet, given that this is just somebody's 0-0 document. But if this gains traction in the working group, then we should certainly do that and make sure that everybody's aware. And the idea, of course, is that we should not shake this system too hard in any fashion. It's a relatively modest change, and it's desirable to have some stability there. Anyway, so that's the proposal and the background. Be happy to get some feedback. Do people agree, with the approach to begin with? And I'm sure that you could have some opinions about the details, like number of trustees. I've heard some people ask for less. Do we think that the way that the persons get named is reasonable in this proposal? What should we do with the ex officio people, and so on? So with that, I guess we'll open the discussion.
John Levine, I happen to be a trustee, although I certainly am not speaking on behalf of the trust. I think this is basically fine. I would suggest making the terms even longer, like 5 years, because the trust, the ongoing work of the trust is pretty simple, and the set of skills is something way, it's different from the mainstream IETF stuff as the LLC is, but in a different direction. So you need to know what the Lanham Act is and what Title 17 says, which is unrelated to anything else in the IETF. So I think, so basically I think keeping it small and stable is a good idea.
Yep, I could agree with that, certain person at least.
Brian Carpenter, a former trustee. I think this is fine too. I'm not sure about 5-year terms, because that, in terms of people's professional lifetimes, that's actually quite a large chunk. So someone might, you're more likely to hit people changing jobs who therefore have to step down with a 5-year term than with a 3-year term. But yeah, the only thing I suggested to you on the email was that the phrase saying that the trust agreement should be changed at their earliest convenience is a bit too aggressive, because if we're clever, we can synchronize the change and reduce the need for interim trustees. I just sent a suggested alternative wording to you by email, so I won't wordsmith right here, but otherwise I think it's a fine proposal.
Yep, thank you.
This is Richard Barnes. Yeah, I generally agree with the minimalistic approach here, because this trust does not have that much work to do, so it makes sense to have a small, relatively dedicated board. I think John's idea to have longer terms is probably a good idea to get people in the grain and who can manage this minimal workload over time. By the same token, I'm not as worried about as Brian is about people being able to do this for 5 years, because it's not that much. Usually, the important thing is that it's done reliably and faithfully. So yeah, I think that the structure proposed here is fine. I think you could probably go down to fewer trustees. If I would be comfortable going to few if other people were inclined in that direction.
Thanks.
Is it me or Ted?
It's around and Ted, I think.
Okay. Yeah, I think I'm generally in favor of minimalistic approach. I'm mindful of Andrew's point that boards with, not much to do, boards, do stuff. I think the fewer the better in this case. The minimal number seems to be 3. Otherwise, you have a dictatorship or a tie. I think we should probably, it seems like a relatively straightforward job that doesn't need a huge board size.
Thanks. Ted?
Ted Hardy, just to go to the point that Brian was making, I'm happy to look at any wording suggestions you have, but there is actually a mechanism here that allows us to maintain continuity, and that's simply that should the stars not line up to get this done at the same time as the IOC dissolution, we simply ask the ISG to appoint the existing trustees for a period of time until this comes into effect. And the advantage of that is simply that by not changing who the trustees are, we avoid having to go through the USPTO filings that are required every time we change them. So it's preferable just from a paperwork and simplicity perspective to avoid that, but there are ways of avoiding it even if we can't make that timing line up perfectly in publication.
That's it.
Leslie Daigle, generally in favor of the minimalistic approach. I agree with Brian Carpenter's concern about 5-year terms. It is an awfully long time in professional life. As far as the ex officio is concerned, I think going with none is certainly a viable option. If you do want to consider including, say, one ex officio person from the current slate, I would argue that it's actually, sorry, Ted, the IAB chair that should be ex officio on the trust, because the IAB has more responsibility for sort of the broader, for the RFC series, for the broader perspective of stuff for which the trust is relevant.
Thanks, Andrew.
This is Andrew Sullivan, and I am also a trustee, but I do not speak for them. The danger in adding any ex officio thing here is that community consultation group, because since we're changing the makeup of this by just saying, oh, we're just appointing people, then there's an argument to be made that like we don't have representativity and so on. But one of the affected communities here is very big on representative appointments to things. And so if we start doing ex officio things, I think we will get pressure to have a lot of other ex officio appointments to it. So I like that feature quite a lot.
That's a good point.
Attorney, I'm a document author and also a trustee, but in speaking primarily just as an individual at the moment, I think one of the things that we have in mind here is that serving as a trustee should not disqualify you from service in other IETF roles. Typically, we say we don't want you to be on the IESG and the IAB at the same time, or the ISAC board and the IAB at the same time, because you're in each other's appeals chain. This is truly a minimal amount of work. And if it happened to be the case that an IAB chair or a former IAB chair, hi Leslie, wanted to serve as a trustee, I don't think it would cause them to be ineligible for any other role. So I think that's another way around making sure we get that perspective without making it ex officio.
You could also twist the argument around that, signing up for this gives you an opportunity to claim that I can't do this other thing because.
Lou Berger, just a quick question. When do you think you'll be ready to ask for the positions to be filled by NOMCOM?
For this document?
Yeah, I know, it's early, so my guess is, it doesn't have the same pressure that we're talking about.
It doesn't have the same pressure, and which is a good thing, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we should, not take things forward. This is, I think, a relatively simple thing, and we didn't know how people would react before sending the proposal on the list and this discussion here. It seems that people are relatively well aligned. So, this could probably go forward relatively soon. But, obviously taking the RFC through approval will take some time. And I don't think we can ask per this RFC until we actually approved it.
Right, and there are, I think the trust document has to be modified to support this also, so. I think we're a while out, right?
At least a couple of months.
Okay.
So I think just to wrap up on what we have next, I think the couple of drafts that we mentioned, we don't really need to discuss because they're going to need to be updated and written. But anyway, we obviously have to update the structure document to reflect the discussion that we've had today. There'll be a confirmation of consensus on the mailing list for what we decided on as well, of course. Alyssa has indicated needs to work with council to finalize the legal formation documents. So that'll be sort of working in parallel. And then we've got a long list of RFCs. Thanks, Bob, just added another one. So, I suspect we'll find a few more of these here and there. And hopefully most of those are pretty quick. But some will not be. They'll be a little bit longer. So a bunch of those will get in the pipeline for working group adoption. And, we'll see that coming up in the next few weeks and months. So I guess then the only other question is, are there any other open items for discussion? Anything anyone else wants to sort of get on the list for the working group to focus on, et cetera? perhaps as noted before, getting directions ready and packaged for the NOMCOM is going to be one of our next topics. We're clearly going to have to work through that, and that'll be something we'll hash out on the mailing lists.
Okay, thank you for that, because that's the one place where I think there's urgency. And if, when we're opening up that document, we think about the trustee appointment at the same time, so that this is a one pass, that would be great.
And anything else? We might actually be able to wrap up early. Look at that. It'd be pretty cool. I think we made some great progress here today. This is fantastic. Look at this. We got this. Yeah, applaud. Applaud for that. All right. No, seriously, thanks. And we will be on the list covering all this. Stay tuned. That's how it's supposed to work. Nobody's bugging me to do things but stare at the map. I should be better about it. Yeah, exactly. It actually worked.
Sent you minutes, if there are any things that I failed to record and you recorded, minutes are taken by officials, the purpose of the officials, and they're not the minutes, and they're written about elections of ministers and meeting maybe. Sure, I see if there's that class. You know what, that's you, right? Yes.
So you should be very happy by having me. Wow, I think that's easy. And I said it was.
Oh, yeah. I know,